So Harald Hardrada means, as you said, harsh ruler before we started.
Yeah, something along those lines. Apparently, there's no perfect English translation, but it's something like the harsh ruler or the hard ruler.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Basically the tyrant, right?
Yeah.
It's not a very nice appellation to have, is it?
Well, it depends what you're aiming for,
Well,
but
I
right.
suppose, yeah, I suppose so,
It's
yeah.
the funny thing, though, he wasn't called that in his lifetime. Like a lot of these things, like Edward Confessor, he was called that afterwards.
Well, you wouldn't call it to his face, would you?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, he's Harald Sigurdsson,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just Harald of Norway.
Yeah.
Sometimes Harald Fairhair, not to be confused with another Harald Fairhair from generations before.
Right.
So, well, that's one of the things.
But he had blonde
'cause there's
hair,
so
is what
many,
we're saying.
Yeah,
So when the
probably.
Netflix adaptation comes around,
when there's people with the same name, basically,
Yeah.
it's later historians will just sort of pick a different name, so it's easier to understand.
Yeah.
You know, if there's loads of Harolds, which there are.
yeah,
You know, at the end of this, he's fighting Harold Goldenstone. It's Harold v. Harold. You know, it's
yeah,
well, there you go. But yeah, so it's a very, very interesting life. It's one of those lives where it's kind of non-stop. It's just adventure and daring do sort
It's
of the
mental,
whole
isn't it?
time, really. Yeah. I think it's one of those things I want to say. We said it about somebody else. I think I said it about Sir Francis Drake, where when your life is so full of events, or someone like Charles Napier or Gordon of Khartoum, you're actually involved in more than one big thing. Most people in life, if you're involved in a historical event, you went to World War II or
you're
something.
only involved in one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Whereas Harald Hardrada is in a fair few. And another thing we said about certain people in history, it's just surprising that they didn't die.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that they didn't die that they live on in history, because they got to be involved in more and more and more things simply through dint that they didn't die. You know?
And Harold is an amazing one because he's involved, like you say, in all these historical events, and his death is in one of these major world historical events. So it's just an incredible life, and this guy must have been a maniac.
Oh yeah, it seems like there's some people that just do what they want.
Yeah.
They just do what they want at nearly all times.
Yeah.
Don't really care about the repercussions. They probably do care, but they're just prepared to
kill whoever comes at them. That's
just
what
prepared
they're
to
prepared for.
risk everything. Yeah. On because there's some things in life you do think, you know, if this was medieval times, I'd just start wiling out right now. But of course you can't do it because we're in a civilized world where you don't do violent things. Well, people like Harald Hardrada just did. They're like, okay, you've peed me off. I'm PO'd now. I'm gonna kill you myself.
Yeah.
Right now.
And he undoubtedly killed a lot of people himself throughout the course of his life.
Yeah, definitely. There's specifically in some of the sagas,
Yeah.
because a lot of this we got sort of the Scandinavian sagas. They say things like, I killed 8 men in this particular battle, and I think I might have killed 2 more, and all stuff like that. And at the end, towards later in his life, claiming he killed 40 people and all different things like that. So, yeah, he's definitely one of those people that got involved in hand-to-hand combat himself.
Oh, yeah.
Or was happy to.
Yeah. I mean, he's like your archetypal Viking. He's like the platonic form of a Viking. You know, this is the best and most universal Viking you've ever seen. It's incredible, actually. He's right at the end of the Viking age, you know, so like the peak of Vikingness is right at the end of it. I just find that fascinating.
Yeah, it's great that you said you called him the last Viking, because of course he's not obviously the last Viking, but people say that because he's in all sorts of ways the last high watermark of the Vikings. So I mean, yeah, it's also a little bit sad again if you're rooting for the Vikings, if you identify with them, if you're Norwegian or something.
If you're rooting for the guys who keep killing everyone for no particular reason other than they can.
But he does seem like, he's not an Edward the Confessor type who's into praying, particularly. Although we'll get into that, he was Christian and did proselytize for the Christianity.
I was Christian, yeah. I'm sure a lot of them were very Christian. I'm sure he was as Christian as he needed to be to satisfy the Emperor of Constantinople or the Pope or whoever he was terrorizing that day. That's what I get from Harald Hardrada.
Well, the Holy Roman Emperor. That's one thing to mention. The map of Europe at this time. You'll see that the Holy Roman Empire, which is a difficult thing.
We'll talk about sometime.
Yeah, it's not necessarily holy nor Roman nor an empire, but
as Voltaire famously formulated,
it takes up a big chunk of the map. So they're sort of a big player, and the Kievan Rus are sort of big players, and of course the Byzantine Empire. But getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, shall we start off just with?
Yeah, where did he come from?
With his early life. So he's Norwegian, sort of firmly Norwegian, and I'll put up maps and things so you can see that. There's even back then, really, there's a Sweden, a Norway, and a Denmark, sort of 3 separate kingdoms. And the interplay between them is interesting and a little bit complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And where we've done epochs on sort of the situation in England, in Britain mainly, and we've only sort of really hinted at what's going on over there, all sorts of things. But it's obviously
Chaos.
yeah,
Right.
and just a whole story, or a whole saga in its own right. Well, just to mention that super quick, the accounts. Of course, when Hardrada ends up coming over and get involved in British affairs, he starts appearing in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle.
Yeah.
But before that, we have to rely much more on Scandinavian and even Byzantine sources. There's lots of Scandinavian sagas, what they call them. Probably the most famous one, the one you'll see quoted mostly, is Snorri Sturluson, his saga.
A lovely name.
Yeah.
How beautiful.
Yeah.
You know?
Snorri.
Yeah.
But there are actually loads of sagas, and they quote. They're like the ancient histories in the way they sort of put speeches in the mouths of people they couldn't, or probably wouldn't have known.
Very much like the Norwegian version of the Iliad.
Yeah, yeah. Not that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle's much better in that sense, but still.
No, but they're less of a story. That's the thing. The sagas are like the Iliad, where it's a story, and you can tell that over the course of like a few nights in a tavern, this would be told out, in the same way the Iliad would.
Yeah, the oral tradition, yeah. And it's one thing just before we leave that there, just to mention that historians, modern scholars, do think, or do know really, that the account of Harald Hardrada as we have it is almost certainly, and sort of deliberately at the time, mixed up with earlier tropes and things. So one example of that is at one point, we'll get to this, but at one point he's fighting out in the Near East, basically in Turkey and Syria. And it says he sacked 80 Arab strongholds.
It's a bit much.
But yeah, it's not only, probably not accurate, almost certainly not accurate, but it's also, that's like a trope in Scandinavian sagas that you take 80 castles or 80 keeps. I don't know why, that's just the thing in their tradition. So...
Well, it's very much like in the Jewish tradition where it's like 40 days and 40 nights, just meaning a long time.
Yeah.
80 castles means a lot of castles.
Exactly that. No, exactly that. It's funny, actually, I was reading, I quite often reference stuff from the story of Lawrence of Arabia, but the Arabs in Lawrence of Arabia just use the word or the term thousands to mean lots.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they say, thousands, but it might only be a few hundred. Or it might be 20,000. It doesn't really matter. It just means lots.
Yeah. Could have been more accurate, but don't worry about it.
I do think that is a hallmark of civilization, to be quite honest. Can you count things properly?
Well, accuracy.
Yeah. Having any sort of accuracy about things. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, just to start then with his life, things start pretty early in his life. His father was an Olaf. Yep. And
man of status, was he?
No, absolutely. A king or a type of king,
some sort of tribal leader, maybe.
Yeah. And he has a big battle in the year 1030. So that's the sort of the 30, 35 plus years we're looking at between 1030 and the mid 1060s. It's Stickelstad, the Battle of Stickelstad, which is in Scandinavia. Yeah.
So it's going to be about 500 people on each side, right?
I think it's a bit bigger than that, but it's not a giant thing. No. And his father was actually killed in that, and Harald Hardrada was only about 15. He
was probably still fighting though, right?
Oh yeah. By the time you're 15, if you're sort of strong enough to wield a sword, if your neck, if you haven't got like a little boy's neck that can barely hold a great helm up, as long as you can do that, you can get involved in a battle. So. Most boys, by the time they're 15, you're good to go, really. And Hardrada was wounded as well in that. Not sure exactly how bad, but it does seem like more than a scratch, because he sort of fled with the remnants of his party and faction eastwards towards the land of the Kievan Rus, and has to, we're told, to sort of convalesces there, or has to sort of spend time, months and months, maybe a year or more, to sort of recovering. Yeah. From his wounds from that battle. And of course his father was killed. So that's sort of a massive, you don't want to get too much into armchair psychology, but that's a big thing, right? Your whole life is flipped on its head. Yeah,
it's quite Genghis Khan-ish, isn't it? Where it's like, right, you just dumped and everyone's left and you're on your own. Good luck.
Yeah.
He's got nothing and he's wounded. So, God.
There's loads of examples of that when boys are,
Yeah.
you're certainly not reached full manhood yet, but you're not a child, and yet you're thrown into the maelstrom. You're suddenly the head of your own household or something, and you've got to sink or swim.
Yeah.
And it's of course the ones that swim. Well, it makes for a pretty hardened character, doesn't it?
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
if you have to fight for your existence when you're like 15,
Yeah.
and you're able to successfully do that, well, it speaks of
You've got a career ahead of you.
yeah,
As Harald absolutely does, you know.
Well, it's like, how many other sort of young aethelings, that's not the right word because we're talking about Vikings here, but how many young princes throughout history have sort of find themselves in that situation and don't grab the bull by the horns and get themselves killed? For some reason, I'm thinking of Britannicus, Claudius's son, who was much older than that. He was basically pitted against Nero.
I mean,
when his father died. And
probably loads who just didn't make any kind of historical impact.
Yeah, right.
You know, you just don't know about them because they died.
Yeah. Like he could have easily have just disappeared into the footnotes of history at this point.
Oh yeah, if he'd died now or like been enslaved now or something like that, no one would know about this guy.
Well, just also putting yourself in just physical harm, physical danger. Seems that he was just up for that straight away.
Yeah.
Well, so to move on, what the head of the Kievan Rus was a Yaroslav. Yaroslav the Wise.
As I understand it, this is like a half Viking, half Slavic kingdom.
That's it.
That's been developed from basically the Swedish Vikings raiding eastward, whereas the Danes and Norwegians raided westward. And so they've formed something akin to a state in this area.
Yeah, like obviously around Kiev, the capital in Kiev. It's a very, very close and interesting ties between Scandinavian sort of Swedes and the Kievan Rus.
And it's because there are large rivers going across the landscape, right? And they could sail most of the way there or something up these rivers, as I understand it.
Yeah, there's rivers that go all the way through modern sort of Ukraine and flow out into the Black Sea.
Right.
And then you can go down to Constantinople and into the Med.
Yeah.
So,
easy journey if you're up for it.
It's the connections between sort of Central Eastern Europe and the Black Sea and therefore Byzantium and therefore the Mediterranean. Yeah, that's a whole well-trodden route. Yeah, absolutely, by the 11th century. And the Kievan Rus are sort of fairly well established. They're quite a power. They're one of the biggest. Well, they're probably the most powerful faction in Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
at this time, and he definitely has some sort of something closer than just mere friendship. So whether it's sort of familial ties, some sort of kinship or whatever, but some sort of connection with the rulers there. It's Yaroslav the Wise, and he just to cut that a little bit short, just to mention that he works for him for a while as a type of mercenary and goes fighting all over the place, fights the Poles and fights the Pechenegs. They're sort of a nomadic central steppe people, interesting type people. But then just to cut ahead a little bit, we'll go back and do this in detail because it's so great. But after he goes and has a career in Byzantium, he sends lots of his treasure, which he earns and steals. He sends it back to Yaroslav in Kiev to hold for him. Yeah. And he does. He doesn't steal it from him or anything. And when he comes back and goes back to Scandinavia, he's like, "You got my money for me, right?" And Yaroslav's like, "Yeah, of course, yeah, here it is." Hands it over.
I mean, there must have been some sort of familial connection.
Right.
Like, this is my cousin or something like that.
It's something more than just being a friend.
Yeah.
Because in those days, even quite a good friendship, giant treasures, giant amounts of gold and silver are sort of much more powerful than that.
And you probably could have, probably would have been useful if you're the ruler of a sort of East European sort of West Asian state to have enough money to buy lots of mercenaries. That would have been very useful. Constant war, constantly attacked by steppe nomads.
What Hardrada had over Yaroslav the Wise, I'm not sure. It might just be pure intimidation. It's like he wouldn't dare steal Hardrada's money. Maybe,
but this guy's surely got an army. Bodyguards. What's Hardrada gonna do?
Yeah, hasn't he got his own army and things? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. If anyone out there is a real scholar of this period or of Hardrada, let us know in the comments or something, or send me an email.
Yeah.
But or the exact relationship there is interesting to me because I don't know it in Fantastic. I'm not sure anyone does.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.